And she's on a cliff when her backpack falls over and sends her shoe flying. She was so surprised that she clutched the other boot, but then she tossed it over the edge too. I can't imagine what it'd be like to lose your hiking boots while you're hiking. Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you face your current season of life. I'm ready, you're ready, let's get this party started. Hello friends, thank you so much for joining me here today. I have a memoir for you. Shocker, another memoir. It's an amazing book. I know you guys are going to love it. But first, I want to share some good news. The cover design for my new book is available now. Hop onto my social media or check your email if you get my monthly emails, or go to my Book Therapy Extra Sessions Substack and you'll be able to see the picture of the cover. It's also on my website too. It'll be everywhere. You can't miss it. Publication is set for November, and I can't wait to have this book in your hands. Once again, it is called Nothing Wasted, Struggling Well Through Difficult Seasons, coming soon to you. All right, enjoy the show. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about the famous memoir by Cheryl Strayed, Wild, From Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. This is an older book. It was published in 2012. This is the memoir of Cheryl's difficult journey after the passing of her mom. A few years after she passed, Cheryl decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. Now, I know you're probably familiar with the Appalachian Trail, but the Pacific Crest Trail is on the West Coast. It goes from California up through Oregon and Washington. Before we talk about the book, my disclaimer is that it is definitely an R-rated book. And then I do recommend the movie, though, even though that's also R-rated. There's some nudity and drug use. Even though they both cover really difficult topics, I am in love with the heart of this book and movie because it is so raw. And Cheryl is an artist. She knows how to bring her truth, her ugly, messy, terrible, horrible truth, to a place of perspective and hope and a lot of redemption. And of course, those are the stories that we love. She's in her 20s when she decides to do this hike. So she's a young female by herself, and the journey is basically impossible. But you cheer for her the whole book through. We are going to talk about her heart. And the first thing we start with is her broken heart. She lost her mom 49 days after her diagnosis of cancer. 49 days. There was absolutely no time for her to process the grief and the trauma of a dying mother who was only in her 40s. And so her mom's death ripped her apart. She says on page 38, "Every now and then I could see myself, truly see myself, and a sentence would come to me thundering like a god into my head. And as I saw myself then in front of that tarnished mirror, what came was the woman with the hole in her heart. That was me." While this book starts with the tragedy of her losing her mom, it's really not all about that. We come to see as we go through the book that this is a journey for her as a person, and she meets her grief in weird ways that she doesn't even expect. Her decision to hike the PCT comes from a lot of different factors, but one thing that's at the root of it, and she says this on page 59, "Of all the things that convinced me that I should not be afraid while on this journey, of all the things I'd made myself believe so I could hike the PCT, the death of mother was the thing that made me believe the most deeply in my safety. Nothing bad could happen to me, I thought. The worst thing already had." It's almost as if her pain makes her invincible. Speaking of pain, she has this backpack, which if you've ever seen hikers or gone hiking, or like the Appalachian Trail is obviously a bigger trail that people talk about. If you've read A Walk in the Woods or heard about these long-term hikers, they have these ginormous backpacks. She has some great vignettes in this book that really give us a visual of what it's like for this 20-something-year-old girl to carry this huge backpack on her back. She names her backpack Monster, and somehow she does it. She walks with this backpack carrying her life on her shoulders and her hips. The backpack causes her a lot of pain and suffering, and the trail causes her a lot of pain and suffering. She says on page 84, as the notion of quitting settled in, I came up with another reason to bolster my belief that this whole PCT hike had been an outlandishly stupid idea. I'd set out to hike the trail so that I could reflect upon my life, to think about everything that had broken me and make myself whole again. But the truth was, at least so far, I was consumed only with my most immediate and physical suffering. The theme that I see come through these pages is that Cheryl keeps walking. She thinks she's going out on this journey to find herself, to reflect, to grieve. But what she finds herself doing is walking and listening and working through her thoughts. But also her toes really hurt and her feet really hurt and her hips get these blisters on them. And the line of her back where the backpack rests on is just torn apart. The skin is just flayed open. I know it's gross, but she's walking hours and hours each day with only a night's rest in between. And she's wearing this backpack on her body. I don't think she knew exactly what she was getting into when it came to just the sheer monotony of walking. But I think that is what helps her get to the other side. I love how she realizes that she can do anything. On page 92, she says, I was amazed that what I needed to survive could be carried on my back, and most surprising of all, that I could carry it, that I could bear the unbearable. These realizations about my physical, material life couldn't help but spill over into the emotional and spiritual realm. That my complicated life could be made so simple was astounding. It had begun to occur to me that perhaps it was okay that I hadn't spent my days on the trail pondering the sorrows of my life, that perhaps by being forced to focus on my physical suffering, some of my emotional suffering would fade away. By the end of that second week, I realized that since I'd begun my hike, I hadn't shed a single tear. Okay, so this covers a few things. First of all, her immediate physical suffering lets the possibility of her emotional suffering fade away. Because she's focused on keeping herself alive and bearing the unbearable on her back, it's slowly making her stronger to deal with that emotional turmoil that she's been facing for several years. In the years since her mom's death, she made a series of choices. She ended her marriage with her husband, and she found herself in some really dark places. So that's what she means by emotional turmoil. And then the fact that she spiraled kept her coming back and asking why. Why to herself, why to her situation, and somehow walking on a path in the woods with nobody around helped her deal with that. Also, she talks about not crying. One would think when you're going on an emotional journey like hiking a trail to deal with your mom's death that you're going to cry. So it does surprise her when she finds herself not crying in the first few weeks. Secondly, we see her mending heart. On page 189, she's relaxing with friends at the end of a long day. And it says, it seemed like a long time, and also it seemed like my trip had just begun. Like I was only now digging into whatever it was I was out here to do. Like I was still the woman with the hole in her heart, but the hole had gotten slightly smaller. What astounds me about this book is that this woman just keeps on going. She keeps on walking. She keeps on fighting. Every day is tough, and she does not give up. One crazy story in the book is when she is having trouble with her shoes. They are hiking boots that she got from REI, but they are too small for her. And so they're killing her feet. She's losing all her toenails, and she's on a cliff when her backpack falls over and sends her shoe flying. She was so surprised that she clutched the other boot, but then she tossed it over the edge too. I can't imagine what it'd be like to lose your hiking boots while you're hiking. But also, they had been giving her such trouble. It was kind of poetic. Her shoe just went bouncing off over the cliff, and she decided, well, might as well get rid of the other one too. It was only a few more days until she got to her next stop, where the mail would come and she would get new boots. So to make it till then, she duct taped her sandals to her feet and had a miserable few days with sandals, but she did get her brand new boots and they did fit her beautifully. Throughout the book, she talks about fear. She talks about being afraid. There are nights where she hears coyotes. There's a few times where she sees snakes and wildlife as she's hiking. One story, and I'm not exactly sure how true the movie is. In the movie, it shows it as a little bit more worrisome, but in the book, I didn't really get that vibe. So I'm not sure exactly how often she ran into shady people, but I know at least at one point she was afraid because there were some creepy men and she had to make a stop to filter some water because the water tank wasn't full where it was supposed to be full. And so she had to go to like a pond and use her tablets and fill the water, but then she had to wait for half an hour for the iodine tablets to work. And during that time, there was an uncomfortable encounter with a couple of people. And so she ran away from that situation as fast as she could. But throughout her journey, she faces her fears in many ways, and she talks to people about it. She says on page 229, "Perhaps by now I'd come far enough that I had the guts to be afraid." I love that line because do we have the guts to be afraid? Are we brave enough to feel fear? It's easy to run from fear. I've been afraid, not necessarily of physical danger that I can think of recently, but there's been some situations where I think about the future and I'm scared. I don't know what's in the future. I'm scared of the dark of the future. I like how she gives us permission to feel afraid and show up in front of our fear and be present with it, because that's what she did day after day. She slept in the dark, under the stars, by herself in her tent for months. I know a ton of people who would never, ever do that, including myself probably. So in that regard, this book is incredibly inspiring. Near the end, she celebrates her mom's birthday. Her mom would have turned 50, but she didn't live to be 50. And at this point, she does talk about what kind of mom her mother was to her and her siblings. She reflects a lot on who she was as a person. And she actually talks about being mad at her mom for not being alive on her birthday. Grief is funny like that. Not funny haha, but funny weird. She found herself really angry at her mom for not being alive for her birthday. She even made excuses about why her mom was a terrible mom. But by the end of that rant, she kept walking. She did have an emotional moment in the woods where she fell to her knees crying out and then realized that she was motherless and she would never have her mom back again. The way she puts it on page 267 is, she would always be the empty bowl that no one could fill. She doesn't have to tell us about her worst moments in her grief, but she does. And it's just such a beautiful invitation to witness someone else in their pain and will them to keep going. We talked about Cheryl's broken heart, her mending heart, and as we got to the end, her mostly whole heart. This brings us to the completion of her hike, her journey, and she has some really good stories. There's really good stories throughout the whole book about just different experiences that she's had. But near the end, she meets these guys, and they're young, and she has a lot of fun with them. And of course, anytime you get food on the trail, it's really rare because she lives off of mushy oatmeal and granola bars and just like nasty food that you can only make in the middle of the woods with no kitchen supplies. I love how she says on page 294, "But that's why I brought you the cake." She found a cake. Someone gave her a cake. They're off the trail. And they make fun of her because they say, like, everybody gives you food. Everybody gives you stuff. They don't give anything to us. And she's young and beautiful. And so they give her a hard time about that. I want to end with this story that she shares near the end of the book. When hiking these long trails, there's something that people call trail magic. And it could be anything. It could be a spotting of an animal, or the way the weather turns just at the perfect time that you need it to, or an apple that somebody left in the hiker's box and you're starving to death. Well, you're probably always starving to death, but trail magic is something that everybody talks about, and those are my favorite stories. She tells about meeting a woman and a little boy on the trail, and he sings her a song. They had been talking about the problems in their life, how this little boy was struggling because his mom was struggling. And of course, Cheryl is grieving the death of her mom. He sings a song called Red River Valley. And when Cheryl heard it, it says that she felt gutted. As she walks away, she starts singing the song to herself and just thinking about music and her mom and the beautiful people in this world. And at the end of the chapter, she talks about how her experiences have just made her feel so alive. Near the end, she cries and cries and cries. Not because she was happy or because she was sad, just because she was full. She was bursting with experience and life and love and trail magic. She felt more sure about herself. She felt almost ready to move forward with her life. Getting to see her cross that bridge at the very end is just really rewarding. I mean, I didn't go on this journey with her. I didn't eat this stale granola bars and mushy oatmeal, but I cheered her on the whole way. And like I am with many memoirs, I just get to the end of the book so thankful for their vulnerability. Thankful that Cheryl Strayed shared her story with me. Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. Today we talked about Wild by Cheryl Strayed, from Lost to Found on the Pacific Crest Trail. She actually used to write a column, and so she's been writing for quite a while, but this memoir hit it really big. And again, they made a movie with Reese Witherspoon. Content warning for both the book and the movie that it is R-rated. If you need an incredibly inspiring memoir, this is definitely one of my favorites. All right, see you next time. Like I was still the woman with the hole in her heart, but the hole had gotten ever so infinitesimally smaller. But the hole had gotten ever so infinitesimally. Oh.